All right, welcome back. We're going to switch our conversation now to something that probably caught our attention 4 or 5 years ago, a phrase, fake news, probably by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and it has become a part of conversation around the world now and what it does to harm narratives wherever you are. And I'm a huge fan of traditional media, of course, which is why I do what I do, but I'm also a huge fan of social media and the battle of how what should be validated as news continues to rage. And I'm joined now by Kaderi Ahmed, who's the founder of Dara Media and the CEO Radio Now. Yes. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Ebuka.
Yes, I think you're kind of like me. You're a huge fan of social media, but you're also in love with traditional media. You do a lot of your work there.
Yes.
First of all, how do you reconcile that? You know, should there be a reconciliation even?
Well, first of all, it's important to explain that when we talk about fake news, there's what is called disinformation, which is a deliberate attempt by people using the media to sort of put out information,
change
a narrative, start a narrative using things that are not factual. And then there's misinformation where genuinely people make mistakes, right? And as a result of that, you know, they either get caught in sort of the people who are trying to use disinformation, or for whatever reason they make a mistake. Now, I think social media is absolutely critical at the times that we live in. Why? Because it has sort of democratized information. And so this idea that you can shut down social media is just an anathema to me as a journalist who's a great believer in sort of people's rights to know. So, and we've seen how social media has sort of enabled people who are voiceless and who don't have a voice to actually articulate and tell their stories. So that is really, really not negotiable. But it is true that you have problems when that information is not right or it is designed to stoke problems. So what do? I think there are a number of things, and it includes, for example, what we've seen happening with the tech companies. There are some things that the tech companies, the Twitters, the Facebook, the Instagrams can do. And then traditional media, which is also beginning to use social media platforms, internally making sure that you've set up processes for verification and don't be so eager to be the first with the news, because you have a responsibility to your listeners. And I think internal controls and also industry-wide regulation. So self-regulation, I think, is really, really critical. But a third part of it, and which I think is something that we need to put into our curriculum, is what is called media literacy. And so from the time a child grows in this particular generation, you should teach children from school how to be able to tell what has been manipulated, what has not, and how to be discerning. In places like France and Germany, this is now becoming standard, you know, as part of the curriculum, because they understand that you can't dial back the hand of the clock. And so the most important thing is to just equip people to sort of be able to tell for themselves what is going on.
Sorry, Coach, how do you do that? Because we live, like you said, in a time where virtually anything is thrown out. We find grown adults who see information and run with it. Sometimes some of us have even seen things you're like,
We've all made mistakes.
We've all made mistakes and believed things. And, you know, before you realize this might have been. So how, as a regular human, do you see information and decide?
We are in new territory, and there's no doubt about that. But, you know, part of, again, like I said, if you kind of educate people and let people know that this is real, then that is one way, so that people begin to be discerning themselves. But I also think that increasingly you're going to find people initially at the beginning of social media thought that social media was going to make journalism irrelevant. On the contrary, I think actually what has now happened is that media houses that earn and maintain the trust of audiences are going to do really, really well, because there's so much misinformation, disinformation out there, that if you end up being the media house that people trust is going to be the currency, right? That's going to be used by media houses to ensure they are successful. So if you become that media house that people know when you put things out, they can almost bet their life on it, then you're going to be the media house that everybody runs to. It doesn't mean misinformation will disappear. disappear, but it means that there are voices that are legitimate, that are credible, that people will then turn to verify whatever they see out there. And I think that has to be the strategy.
I mean, we even have a case, not just in Nigeria, around the world, where even government has been accused of throwing things out there. Just to
but you see, it's really, if you look
at
the way Donald Trump used this idea of fake news and delegitimized the media, it's really dangerous. Particularly in societies that believe in democracy, because you cannot have democracy without a free press, right? So anybody who undermines the media essentially is undermining democracy, because there's a reason why the journalism is embedded in our constitution, right? It is supposed to help hold people in positions of authority accountable, because nobody else can. And so it is an important and critical pillar of democracy. Our democracy is not perfect. None is, as we've seen America 200 plus years unraveling, right? So, but it is something you keep trying to perfect, and you can't perfect it if you muzzle the press, if you become autocratic and you undermine the press, right? It's really, really dangerous, you know, undermining the press, because this same press that you undermine, you will be surprised, you may need them in a year or two, you know?
So sort of shifting a bit from the conversation on fake news, I mean, social media, like we've seen, even in Nigeria, has become very powerful with elections, with the protests, and just, you know, speaking out and holding government accountable. But unfortunately, we also have areas in this country where, you know, penetration of sort of mobile and data isn't as healthy as it should be. You are very passionate about issues in the North. You've spoken up a lot about, you know, all of the banditry and things just happening in the northwestern part of this country. And it feels like, because the social media penetration isn't as strong as it is there, voice isn't amplified enough. So this sort of shifts again the responsibility to traditional media.
Yes, absolutely.
In situations like that, how do we help to amplify this sort of conversations better?
Well, so, I mean, the North radio remains really powerful in the North still, but surprisingly, so does WhatsApp. Because there's a phone now in everybody's hand.
WhatsApp is a whole other conversation.
Yes, you know, so but it's a social media platform.
Yes,
and I know people, when they think of social media, they think in terms of Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, and all of that. But WhatsApp is actually, one of the studies I saw, and I can't remember who did it now, shows actually that the bulk of fake news that is actually shared on WhatsApp. If you remember, I think last year, they actually reduced the number of shares you could do per item to something like 5. And it was because people were using it to sort of forward things, and it could be damaging. So in the North, WhatsApp is actually quite powerful. You find that Kannywood, for example, local singers use that as a platform to sort of, you know, promote their work. And so there's no reason why, you know, as a creative media organization, one cannot tap into that. So we, for example, at Radio Now, are already planning programming using WhatsApp as a means of disseminating that information. So, but that's not to say that you don't need developmental journalism. So our radio stations, our TV houses have a responsibility to become the voice of the voiceless. There are people living on the fringes of society whose concerns, whose problems do not make it into the mainstream. And part of it is a problem of essentially money. A lot of media houses don't have enough resources to do the sort of reporting that they should do to put people across this country. Part of it is a lack of training, but there's also a part of it which is simply the fact that you're not at the table. And it's a bit like, you know, you talk about inclusion. So media houses have a responsibility when they're hiring to also be diverse in the way they hire. Because when people are around the table, they tend to remember the issues that bother them. But sometimes it's just an omission, not because of anybody is being nasty or anything. It's not deliberate. It's just that there's no one there to articulate what the issues are, because they're not from there. They don't understand it.
We'll get to your new baby Radio Now very quickly. But before that, I want to talk about, you know, we've talked about fake news and government, and, you know, this idea keeps floating around in Nigeria that, you know, there's going to be a bill very soon to sort of regulate. They say they're not banning, to regulate, you know, free speech pretty much, especially with social media.
I think it'll be a mistake.
How do we, as people now, you know, handle that conversation with government? And if you were to advise government, what do you tell them to do? Because there's people who have said regulation is kind of important, but what kind of regulation? Or is it even important?
Yeah, so I think it would be a mistake for government to try and sort of clamp down. You must understand, the people who are in office today, are only in office because people fought hard to entrench democratic rule. There are people who fought soldiers to a standstill in this country so that we could go to the polls and actually elect a president. That would not have been possible if you were muzzling the press. The Nigerian press gets a lot of flack because we're not perfect. Like almost all institutions in this country, we have issues. But by and large, when it comes to the sort of big matters, the press has stepped up to the plate and done the important things. People like Kule Ajibade went to jail. People like Dapo Oloriyomi, Bagauda Kalto died, fighting and trying to report what the military was doing. And so for you to now say you want to dial all that back simply because you are now in a position of authority and you feel that the media is being used to attack you. No, that is absolutely wrong. You don't make rules for individual governments. We make rules that are supposed to be for the generality of Nigerians, right? So look, we have a problem. It is true. But I've told you the ways to go about solving that problem. Engage the tech companies. Engage the media companies. And I get a bit frustrated because there's been a conversation internally that has been taking place within Nigerian media space, traditional media, and a few online outfits as well, about self-regulation. I am passionate about that because it does a number of things. Self-regulation forces us to essentially improve our own standards, right? It forces us to be accountable because you can't say you're holding others accountable and then you're not holding yourself accountable. It's really important. If you do these two things, you will watch and you'll see almost instantly the quality of our offerings will improve. And that has got to be good news if you're a businessman running a media house, because the better quality offering you have, the more people trust you, and the more audiences you have, and the better you do as a business. So I think it's a bit too slow, and I think it has now become rather urgent. And so I'm saying to the people, if they are watching me now, all those emails I've been sending, can you people please reply them? We need to self-regulate.
Yes.
I'm clear about that. That's what happens in a lot of other places. Appoint some sort of ombudsman whose job it is to take complaints and, if possible, sanction people. Agree all those things, and let's all sign up to it. Yeah. I think it will make a big difference. In terms of just things that are wrong, there are already rules. We have the Cybercrime Act, which, can be used actually if you do really horrible things online. We've got libel and slander laws. You can use that to go after journalists who lie or who do things that you feel damage your reputation. You don't need new laws.
Yes. Very well put there. Thank you very much for putting us concise there. But let's talk about Radio Now. I mean, you, Radio Now 95.3.
Yes.
For those of you who need to know. Why did you feel the need to do this? Because the one thing we don't lack is radio stations.
Yes.
Why do we need to have another one? And why was this important for you?
Okay, so obviously I started out in radio in London. So I have a passion for radio. Why? Because I think it reaches every corner. I think it's one of those things that when TV came, many people thought radio would die. It hasn't. And the reason is that it can be a very seamless medium. You can be doing so many things while at the same time your radio is sort of in the background. Unlike a TV station, you don't need to put a lot of attention. You could actually be sitting and listening to radio. But the more important thing is that a lot of the radio stations we have here, very few actually focus on public service journalism. And for me, I think that has got to be critical, particularly at this point in time where we're going through periods of change. I think the public's right to know, and the fact that, the public needs to be given the information so that they are informed citizens and they're taking informed decisions about everything that affects them is critical. And so that's the kind of, we want to do proper journalism on our radio station. But there's also another area that I think we don't do very well with. So we don't want to compete with breaking news and all of that. That's not our interest. We want to do context. We want to do analysis. We want to tell people what this means, how it affects them, and if they want to get involved, how they can get involved. So it's about social consciousness for us and national development. That is our focus on Radio Now.
Yeah. So do you get worried that, I mean, a lot of people believe, especially in Lagos,
yes,
you listen to radio to get away from the stress. You
Yes.
want to hear music. Do you worry about, sort of receivership from the part of the public?
So
because, I mean, it's great. It's a great idea.
There's a lot of anecdotal things that you hear about audiences. But when you actually go out and do the work of researching. So, for example, until the NSAS thing happened, we were told Nigerian youths are not interested in politics and governance and whatever. And it turns out it's because nobody has found the topic a way to sort of rally them and the trigger for that, right? It's the same thing they say about radio, this generation, this one. And I find it's about the packaging. So you have to understand your audiences and the fact that they now actually have multiple things competing for their attention. So how you package your information and how you sell it will determine. And it's a mixture. So we're not saying we're not going to do entertainment and music. But even that, we want to do it in a way that empowers people. If I bring in a Wizkid into my studio and I'm talking to him, I don't want to talk to him just about his tracks. I will about sort of what informed how he put, because some of them also do a lot of social conscious music. But I also want to talk to him about the business. You know, young people that are interested in music, that want to get into the business of music. Is there anything in his experience that would teach them how to do this? I'm sorry, my nose is running. And your studio is very cold.
Don't tell them.
Yeah. So, and I actually think there's a market. It might not be the populist market. It might be a niche market, and that is perfectly fine. We're not trying to be all things to all people. Our interest is in influencing policy, helping to sort of set agendas about the things that matter, and generally promoting national development, using information as a tool.
I think that's very, very important, because a lot of people I found during the NSAS protest, people will put out stuff and they'll be like, oh, I didn't know this law existed, or I didn't know this thing was a thing. You know?
So for example, one of the things that we've pioneered and which is proving to be really, really popular is called Radio Now Explains. And it's a really short segment that just takes things that we hear in the news all the time, but people don't understand. So, for example, the social media bill, we had an expert come and explain to us, okay, what does the bill try to do? What is it trying to do? The other day, the president announced money to prepare for census. And we thought, that's a lot of money for preparation and not for the census itself. So we got an expert to come in and explain what census is. We've had people come in and explain, things like the Land Use Act, which was recently in the news because there was a bill in front of Parliament, trying to sort out a few things. So it's really important. It's going to be a mixture of informative stuff that gives you the information you need as a citizen to engage properly. But it is also us saying that we must hold people in positions of authority accountable, because at the heart of it, that is what our constitutional duty is.
Ultimately.
Yes.
Has this launched?
No. So we've been test transmitting. We launched on December 1st. We're very excited about that. Very worried too. But we will be on 95.3 FM for people in Lagos, and then we are online as well, so people can actually also hear us from across the country.
Anywhere they are.
Yes,
so tell us about this boot camp thing you're working on for trainers or something.
Yes, so
trainees.
I have a lot of goodwill. I'm a very lucky woman. Red Media, which is run by Chude Jidonwas, and Adebola. Chude and myself were colleagues, and I like to think that at some point I was his mentor. I like to take credit for things I didn't do. But, they basically, I'm working with them, and they've sort of volunteered their skills, their resources to help me find and train the next generation of radio producers, journalists, etc., etc. And so it's a 2-week boot camp, and it's been going very well.
Okay.
Yes.
Amazing stuff.
Yes. So
radio
we're bringing
now?
in new people to sort of help us, run this radio station, because we think sometimes it's better to bring fresh people who've not, don't have ideas, and allow them to just be creative. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Radio Now 95.3. Test running now, but it's going live on December the 1st, so make sure you join in and learn a few things, most importantly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ebuka, for having me. Thank you.
See you after this. Don't go away.